All right, I'm the Flat Rate Master, and today we're talking about prepping and execution of big jobs. All right, so if you don't know the story of how I run this shop foreman, bigger jobs I tend to kick to other technicians because it's hard for me as shop foreman to get involved in like dash pulls, major engine pulls, stuff like that, because I get pulled off so many times. Like for instance, today I was trying to diagnose a check engine light, and it's an interesting story. The parts cannon has definitely been thrown at it, and by a Ford dealer, not picking on anybody, but yeah, it's not an easy one. Before Ford dealer tech starts screaming at me, it's not an easy one. But while I was trying to deal with that, going through information, I can't tell you how many times I got interrupted. And then while I was working on another car, doing a valve adjustment, kept getting interrupted. It's hard for me to do big jobs, but when I do big jobs, I have to stay very organized so that when I get pulled off of them, I know exactly where I'm at, so it doesn't get ugly, bent valve, stuff like that. So we're going to go over my process for doing a big job, prepping for it, and execution. Big thing first off, clean your area. Before I pulled in the big job that's sitting behind the camera, I cleaned up all my tools, put them all away, looked for missing ones, something you should do anyway, but cleaned and organized everything so I knew exactly where my stuff was. And then I cleaned that bay. I had done another job in that bay. I'd made a little bit of a mess with coolant and stuff, so I pulled out the floor cleaner and cleaned my floor before I brought the truck in. Loose stuff up off the floor, get ready for that big job. Now, organization. The big job, I'm sure some of you, the people in the audience, are going to be going, "Oh, that's not a big job. It's gravy." It is, but it's a rather intensive job, so we're going to get into it. First thing, for me, I use magnet trays. On my roll cart, I've got magnet trays on my side shelf. For normal jobs, I just use those. For big jobs, I use multiple magnet trays. The job is a oil pump on a 14 Silverado 5.3, nothing real major, but large job. Now, under the hood, I've got a magnet tray just sitting on top of the intake with segregated bolts. I've got my crank bolt that gets replaced anyway, bracket bolts, AC compressor bolts over here, and then my alternator bolts. But if you notice, I sit there and go tell you what it is. Now, some people will take and use a Sharpie and mark what the bolts go to. I've got a pretty good memory, so I just kind of remember. It's a weird thing about me. I don't know what to tell you. All right, next thing I do is I get a dedicated area to set my parts. I got a workbench over here. I've got a magnet tray with bolts. This is pretty much everything I've taken off: the suspension, the differential, the bracket bolts for the cross member, steering rack bolts. I've got all this stuff segregated onto this tray, and when I get further into the job, I will do the same thing. I will take another magnet tray, and all my oil pan bolts will go in that tray. Maybe my timing cover bolts will go in that tray, but I'll have segregated on these bigger jobs. Now, one thing you can do is take and put the bolts back in the component they go into. Now, I don't generally like that because it's easy for a component to get knocked over and your bolts go flying anyway. But on a bench like this, it's fine. You notice I've got my differential up here, has to come out, radiator hoses, all set up on this workbench. Now you don't have to use a workbench. You can use a, behind the vehicle if you've got bay space. Like I've got a couple parts on their toolbox on this truck. They're plastic, so nobody scream. They're plastic, so they're not gonna hurt anything. But it's a way to organize your parts so you can go back to them and the order which you took them off. So when I'm coming back to put this stuff back on, I've got the stuff I need staged in a way closer to the edge of the workbench is the stuff I took off last. And then you work your way to the back of the workbench or next to the truck. Normally what I do if I'm working and I don't have a workbench available, it's got stuff on it or whatever, I will, between the bays, furthest point away is the first thing I took off and then work my way up, usually till I'm about to the front tire, and that's where the last part I took off will be. And then you work your way back. That way, instead of having a pile of parts and you got to go, oh, well, did I take this bracket off first? No, you've got it set up so it's organized and you can just work your way back to driving car. Now, another really important thing to do is go through your parts. Make sure you've got them all. Oil filter, gaskets, crank seal, RTV, belt. The actual part you went in there to replace is actually, here. Now here we have it pretty easy. Our computer system is available at everybody's bay, so we can look up and see what parts haven't been checked in. And as long as the people up front do their job and actually count the parts, we should have what we should have, but it's important to double check to make sure you've got all your parts. Because there's nothing worse, and it happened to Bam Bam not too long ago. He was doing a time and chain job and we got dealer parts. The valve cover gasket, he got one bank but not the other, and whoever checked in the parts didn't do it right because they were missing that valve cover gasket even though we got billed for it. So it's always important to go through your parts and make sure everything you need is there, because a gravy job can go to just simply by missing one part, and it's usually a really important part that stops you dead in your tracks. So always check in your parts, always make sure they're there. Stay organized. If you need to stop and reorganize, stop and reorganize. It's better to take a few minutes to clean up and put your tools back away so you can find them again than to sit there and spend 20 minutes looking for a socket because you put it down somewhere in a pile and can't find it. So when you're doing a big job, work smart and stay organized. More organization means more efficient. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like it, subscribe. Make sure and hit that bell notification so you get notified when I put out new videos.